on Judgment Day, the men of Nineveh will stand up for this generation and condemn it. Because when Jonah preached, they repented. And there's something greater than Jonah here. Preaching is all that our brethren in the Protestant world have, essentially. And they do it well. Quite often they put us to shame. And the hearers, according to their attention anyway, can glean many graces just from the word. But we can say in our context that there is more than preaching here. We have the preacher, the Alpha and the Omega, standing in our midst. We hear his word, and we then are at his feet physically. And where he is, there is a whole army, a cloud of hidden witnesses, our friends, the angels, adoring. Far more, therefore, in our case. And yet, just for instance, over the water, the land that by our Blessed Lady herself was going to be, in her mind, according to the story of the origin of Walsingham, because there's a miracle at the beginning of it, the land that she wanted as her dowry would forfeit that sacramental grace. And we ended up with a situation of only the Word, where until then there was the fullness everywhere of Catholic life, with all its fullness and completeness of life, where every corner was affected by divine grace. Listen to this commentary. The cold. It's referring specifically to a ruin. It's something which hit this writer in this recent work just published when he got to the ruin of an old Cistercian monastery in Flintshire in North Wales on the border with England. Amazing work. The cold had brought the place to naught. What cold? It was the cold in the hearts of Catholics, enamoured with created goods and comfortable opinions. As you may remember, one bishop alone stood out, made a saint along with a layman who stood out, Thomas More. So John Fisher and Thomas More are among the first, 1535. It was just more comfortable to keep a low profile. And if we're not careful, we can find ourselves in the same situation right now, in 2018. There's an old prophecy which goes right back, that in one part of it says this: Ireland will lose the faith, and it will be the fault of the priests. Tampering with the faith handed down from the apostles, the faith witnessed to by countless martyrs, so beginning in this time, first of all with the Carthusians, then these two great ones, and then right down the line to 1681 with our local one, the last of a great army, our own dear Oliver Plunkett. And radiated through the virtues of millions of simple and learned believers. The lay people, the likes of Margaret Clitheroe, who, because she was committing high treason for hiding priests, received the punishment due to women, being crushed to death. A new generation came to ignore God's true presence in the Holy Eucharist and soon denied it. there were those who survived through external conforming to the law by appearing minimally in the established church building. It would seem that in the north of England there was a bit of that going on, and we have one interesting example, a certain William Shakespeare, of whom some of you may perhaps have heard.
Mm-hmm.
His name has appeared in the Venerable College in Rome, the English College, which is still there actually, it's never moved place. And we therefore surmise that this signature means that he was there for a while, just out of danger. Fortunately for literature, he did carry on writing, but he did use it as a very powerful means of crypto preaching of the Catholic faith, because all his plays work because of the powerful Catholic thinking behind them. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. More needs she the divine than the physician. I'll not kill thy soul, says Othello, not wanting to strangle her at the wrong time. For clergy and laity alike, fidelity to this most salutary belief was then condemned as high treason. After centuries of superstition, the age of reason had dawned. Translate. After the dark ages, the fullness of light and understanding liturgy came just at the end of the Second Vatican Council. So, the age of reason had dawned, so they were told. When the last sanctuary lamp got smashed, the dazzling constellation of churches, large and small across the land, from country chapels to city minsters, was snuffed out. No longer would souls gather around the warmth of the tabernacles. Those tabernacles which would actually be warmed by not a few human presences. Many of the churches of England had a recluse walled into the apse end of the church. Living torches, freely, gratuitously, sacrificing themselves, as does the candle, giving off its being in light and warmth. I make a jump. In Catholic England, until then, all the feasts of the church gave the rhythm to life. Now, in many a country, including actually Catholic Ireland, we have grown out of that sort of thing. It is no longer part of the calendar as such. Park it on the day that they can get away with it without interrupting the important things of life. Sunday, and if that's too much of a burden, get it over with on Saturday evening. Whereas, notice the amount of preparation already going on in all our buildings, families and schools for the great feast of the year. Religion normally is not to be publicly proclaimed. There is one exception, however, the worship of Satan. This morning I did some research on actually what Halloween is about. Already, way back, as early as about 900 BC, the Celtic peoples who had come to this western part of the world, here and over the water, had brought with them and established the Druidic cult, which had power because it was demonic. And the devil must have blood. So human sacrifice was part and parcel of it. It would seem that a huge amount of it happened in the likes of Stonehenge. There was a custom of going around to ask for a favour to the inhabited places around, and the favour requested was a person, preferably young, which eventually would be sacrificed. If the person was handed over, it would be either a slave or even a member of the family, a child. Then they would leave it at that. If it was refused, then the hexagonal cross in a circle would be placed over the dwelling, and it was the most ferocious satanic sign that could be used. And from this hexagonal star, therefore, these points, which we find again, even in our time, this star within a circle with 6 points, hexagonal, would be an invitation for a hex to come and a curse to be placed by these same demonic forces upon that house and family. In the nights leading up to the 1st of November, about 3 nights, a certain amount of sacrifice would be taking place, and there was only one way for one of these victims to escape being sacrificed. It was to be victorious in an ordeal. And the ordeal was as follows. A liquid made essentially of the juice of apples, but something of that nature, mead, would be boiled to its own boiling point, which is much higher than that of water, witness an apple tart you might eat, and at the temperature of 212 degrees Fahrenheit, they would then throw in apples, and the victims would be invited to try with their teeth to take away a complete apple. And as the head would draw close to this solution, by its very nature and its heat, it would already start to melt away and torture the skin, to have an effect immediately on the senses, rendering the person practically deaf, unable to speak, and so on. And very few could actually manage with their teeth in that ordeal to extract an apple. If he did, then he'd be mangled and just about alive, but otherwise he would be a victim to this higher power. So we see already the antiquity of some of the traditions that have come through to us, modernized and sanitized. But the origin is dark. What is less known is that this is the high point of satanic worship all over this globe. And a large number in some areas are actually being sacrificed. They have breeders, and we have unbelievable orgies, terrible cruelty, and details that I cannot repeat in a place like this, but will surpass even your most technicolor imagination. And it seems that this is increasing, and it would explain partly what we're seeing around the Catholic Church, because one of the main desires of all that Satan draws into his worship is the destruction of the means of grace, and therefore of the soul of man, ultimately in its loss, without defense. And it would seem also that this plethora of satanic worship in some shape or form is happening in the most unexpected places. And we have reports that the Vatican itself is not to be excluded, which would explain a certain number of things. I just conclude with a word regarding the issue. All Satan wants ultimately is to get his own back and increase his own empire. Eternity, therefore. Eternity. Scientists have measured the extent of the earth, the depth of the sea, the dimensions and distances of the stars, but no measure can be found for eternity. No measure can reach the boundary of eternity, because no boundary exists. O eternity, exclaims St. Augustine, what art thou? Say what you will of it, and you have never said enough. Say that it includes as many millions of years as there are stars in the firmament, grains of sand on the seashore, leaves in the trees, drops of water in the ocean. You will never have said enough. And why? Because no time, no matter how long, can have any proportion to eternity. Add millions of years to it, and it will not become greater. Take away millions of years from it, and it will not grow less. A sinner condemned to hell 1,000 years ago can say, I have now been buried in hell 1,000 years, but he cannot say, now I have 1 hour less to suffer. Eternity remains just as long as it was when he first entered